They thought stripping the pension of a 42-year-old software engineer was just a perfect cost-cutting equation on their spreadsheet. They forgot a blood-soaked rule of Silicon Valley: never corner the woman who built your core security system. The day they coldly erased my future with an automated email. They had no idea they just armed a legal time bomb worth $40 million. When that countdown hit zero, I was not the one begging on my knees. Hello and welcome back to Boss Revenge Stories. I want to sincerely thank you all for your continuous support, but unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to operate and forcing us to stop uploading new videos here in the near future as we transition our operations to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please consider supporting us by joining our Patreon to listen to even better, exclusive, and highly detailed true stories with multiple emotional voice actors that we simply cannot publish on YouTube, which you can access by scanning the QR code on your screen or clicking the Patreon link in the description or pinned comment. Now, let us dive right into today's story of Chloe Fox. It was a typical Tuesday morning in Austin, Texas, and the air conditioning inside the Omnistrata Data Corp headquarters was blasting at its usual freezing 68 degrees. I am Chloe Fox, 42 years old, the lead data architect of this massive medical data management corporation. I was sitting at my desk, quietly sipping a cup of black coffee that had gone completely cold, staring blankly at the sterile gray walls of my cubicle. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, a constant, mind-numbing drone that matched the rhythm of my keystrokes. That was when the notification pinged on my screen. It was not an urgent message from the development team or a calendar invite for a quarterly review. It was a cold, automated system email generated by human resources. The subject line read, "Notice of Strategic Benefits Restructuring." I clicked open the message, my eyes scanning the heavily sanitized corporate jargon that filled the screen. At the bottom, buried beneath thick layers of legal disclaimers and empty corporate sympathy, was the absolute punchline of my career. My vested pension trust was being permanently dissolved, completely wiped out with a single keystroke. This was the exact same trust I had been promised for surrendering my youth, my weekends, and my sanity to this company. The vesting period for this exclusive benefit required exactly 15 years of continuous, loyal service. My hands trembled slightly as I pulled up my official employment dashboard to check my exact tenure. The screen stared back at me with undeniable cruelty. My tenure stood at exactly 14 years and 8 months. 4 months. They were severing my financial lifeline just 120 days before it legally became mine to keep. No severance package or standard retirement account could ever replace the 7-figure security I had meticulously factored into my life plan. For over 14 years, I had built Omnistrata's core medical data architecture from absolutely nothing. When the original founders were operating out of a cramped, poorly ventilated leased office, I was the one writing the foundational encryption protocols at 3 o'clock in the morning. I survived on cold pizza, cheap energy drinks, and sheer, unfiltered willpower. Now, to the current executive board. All those sleepless nights meant absolutely nothing. I was no longer the brilliant, indispensable architect who built their fortress. I was just a bloated, expensive line item. I was a heavy-cost burden that needed to be surgically removed to beautify the third-quarter financial report for our greedy shareholders. I did not scream. I did not throw my cold coffee at the monitor or smash my keyboard against the desk. Instead, I stood up slowly, smoothed out my slacks, and walked straight to the executive suites on the glass-enclosed top floor. I cornered Wyatt, our chief operating officer. Just as he was stepping out of his massive corner office, Wyatt was the kind of man who wore $5,000 tailored suits to hide his absolute lack of technical competence. When I demanded a direct explanation regarding the sudden termination of my pension, he did not even have the basic human decency to look me in the eye. He simply adjusted his perfectly knotted silk tie, offered a hollow, practiced smile, and fed me the exact same prepackaged garbage they feed the business press. "Chloe, you really have to understand the current macroeconomic climate," he said. using his most patronizing, velvety corporate voice. This decision is purely about cash flow optimization and ensuring our market adaptability in an incredibly volatile tech landscape. It is nothing personal at all. We all have to make difficult sacrifices to keep the ship afloat. Nothing personal. The phrase echoed in my head like a sick joke as I turned my back on him and walked back to my desk. Wyatt was a textbook corporate sociopath, so his utter indifference was entirely expected. But a benefits restructuring of that immense magnitude required a direct manual sign-off from the head of human resources. It could not be executed by a machine alone. I opened the back-end portal, utilizing a set of deep administrative privileges I had built into the system over a decade ago, and traced the digital signature attached to the termination document. When the name finally populated on my screen, all the air violently left my lungs. It was Vanessa, the human resources director, Vanessa, who was supposed to be my absolute closest friend in this cutthroat corporate wasteland. Just 5 years ago, when she was desperately searching for a way out of a severely toxic job, I was the one who put my own professional reputation on the line to personally vouch for her. I practically handed her the human resources manager position on a silver platter, guiding her carefully through the toxic office politics until she finally climbed to the director seat. We had shared countless lunches, celebrated our birthdays together, and spent hours complaining about Wyatt's staggering incompetence over $20 cocktails. And yet, there it was, her digital signature, crisp, green, and completely undeniable, resting right at the bottom of the official order that slaughtered my financial future. She had signed my execution warrant without offering so much as a 2-second text message of warning. In the modern American tech industry, loyalty is just a dead language, and my best friend was the one holding the bloody knife. Most people would have stormed out, hired an aggressive labor attorney, or thrown a highly publicized tantrum in the main corporate lobby. I did absolutely none of those things. I knew that in the ruthless ecosystem of modern tech corporations, visible anger is treated as a weakness to be immediately exploited. Instead, I walked calmly back to my cubicle, opened my email client, and drafted a perfectly polite, entirely submissive message to both Wyatt and Vanessa. I formally requested to shift my daily responsibilities into a standard maintenance mode for my remaining time, citing a deep professional desire to ensure a seamless operational handover before my inevitable departure. They approved the request in less than 15 minutes. They genuinely believed I was just another broken, middle-aged corporate drone who lacked the spine to fight back against the machine. By playing the role of the defeated victim, I gained the one strategic advantage I desperately needed: unrestricted, unmonitored, and unquestioned time on their internal network servers. The real investigation began at 2 o'clock the following morning. Sitting in the sterile, dark glow of my home office monitors, listening to the quiet hum of my computer's cooling fans, I launched a secure virtual machine and tunneled directly into Omnistrata's deeply shadowed internal data partitions. I did not need to deploy malicious malware or execute a brute force attack to hack them. You cannot hack a fortress when you are the original architect who secretly designed the master blueprints and kept the skeleton key to the basement. I effortlessly bypassed the standard enterprise security firewalls that I had personally coded, slipping undetected into the highly restricted executive financial drives like a ghost. The narrative they continuously fed the public and the junior staff was entirely focused on tightening belts and weathering a severe economic storm. But the digital financial ledgers hidden in the executive directories told a completely different, absolutely sickening story. I meticulously traced the exact flow of the massive capital that had been violently ripped from my pension fund, along with the retirement accounts of 12 other senior, long-term engineers. The millions of dollars they saved did not go toward vital server upgrades, debt reduction, or saving the company from bankruptcy. Instead, the funds were quietly and systematically routed through 3 different subsidiary shell accounts, before landing softly in a restricted, high-yield pool explicitly labeled as the Executive Year-End Performance Initiative. Every single dollar stolen from the futures of loyal employees was being directly repurposed to guarantee massive, Seven-figure holiday bonuses for the board of directors. Wyatt, Vanessa, and the chief executive officer were literally going to buy their third luxury vacation homes using the exact money I had earned through 14 long years of blood, sweat, and absolute dedication. However, the financial theft was only the outermost layer of their decaying corporate carcass. Digging deeper into Wyatt's strategic planning and operational folders, I uncovered a highly classified initiative codenamed Project Phoenix. It was a comprehensive, step-by-step roadmap designed for my absolute professional termination. They were in the final stages of onboarding a discount, external outsourced development team from overseas, entirely composed of junior coders who cost a mere fraction of my current salary. To compensate for this outsourced team's severe lack of technical expertise, the company had recently purchased an incredibly expensive, supposedly state-of-the-art artificial intelligence software suite intended to automate my daily data architectural tasks. Worse still, the project timeline dictated that starting next Monday, I would be officially assigned to lead mandatory knowledge transfer sessions. They fully intended to force me to manually train these external contractors, essentially making me dig my own grave, hand over my shovel, and smile politely while doing it. Then, I found the digital dagger. It was an email buried deep within a private, unencrypted server exchange between Vanessa and Wyatt. I opened the message, my eyes locking onto the exact words my so-called best friend had casually typed just 48 hours prior. "Do not worry about Chloe," Vanessa had written. "She is just a worker bee drained of honey, easily cleaned up. She will quietly do the handover if we dangle a fake recommendation letter and a minor severance check in front of her." The sheer, sociopathic cruelty of those specific words burned away any lingering trace of grief or shock I held for our dead friendship. Vanessa was not a conflicted manager who had to make a tough, emotionally taxing business call. She was a corporate parasite who viewed my absolute ruin as a minor logistical cleanup task. My cold sorrow instantly crystallized into a hyper-focused, calculating rage. I needed to know exactly what kind of revolutionary artificial intelligence they actually thought could replace a decade and a half of bespoke, highly specialized system architecture. I pulled the binary executable files of their shiny new automated software suite and began to meticulously decompile the operational layers. As the raw code slowly unraveled and populated across my wide screen, a strange, creeping sense of intense familiarity washed over me. I thoroughly analyzed the automated data parsing algorithms and the deep encryption handshakes. I stared closely at the monitor, my heart suddenly pounding a frantic, victorious rhythm against my ribs. The foundational structure was not new. It was not some groundbreaking machine learning miracle birthed by modern tech geniuses. The core operational variables utilized highly distinct, quirky naming conventions that I had personally created over 10 years ago when I was surviving on cheap takeout food and debugging the initial company databases at midnight. The expensive artificial intelligence company they had hired had essentially scraped, stolen, and repackaged Omnistrata's legacy proprietary code. My original code. They were using a poorly wrapped, bootlegged version of my own foundational encryption logic to replace me, and the executives who authorized the purchase were too incredibly technically illiterate to ever realize it. They had absolutely no idea how the core architectural structure actually functioned, nor did they comprehend the catastrophic, legally binding traps that still lay completely dormant within its deepest layers. The physical world often holds the absolute final word over the digital one. While Wyatt and Vanessa were busy constructing their fragile empire of lies on cloud servers and encrypted corporate messaging apps, my salvation was buried inside a dusty, heavy cardboard banker's box tucked away in the darkest corner of my bedroom closet. It was 3 o'clock in the morning, 2 days after I had discovered their pathetic artificial intelligence replacement scheme. The adrenaline had completely burned out of my system, leaving behind a cold, sharp, and terrifyingly calm clarity. I was no longer a grieving employee mourning the sudden death of her career. I felt a profound sense of awakening. moving with the precise, methodical rhythm of a seasoned hunter quietly oiling her rifle in the dead of night. I sat cross-legged on the hardwood floor, surrounded by stacks of yellowing folders. The air smelled faintly of dry paper and old ink. I was specifically hunting for a master employment and intellectual property contract I had signed exactly 14 years ago. The original founders of OmniStrata were incredibly paranoid. Old-school software engineers who deeply distrusted corporate executives. Back then, they had insisted on writing airtight protections for the core technical staff before they eventually sold the company and retired to a private island. My fingers finally brushed against a thick, heavy-stock manila envelope labeled with the year of my initial hiring. I pulled out the 50-page legal document, tracing the faded blue ink of my own signature. I flipped past the standard non-disclosure agreements, past the generic non-compete clauses, straight toward the deeply buried intellectual property addendums. There it was, sitting quietly at the bottom of page 32, Appendix 9.4c. To an untrained eye, it was just a dense, unreadable wall of complex legal jargon. To me, it was a perfectly crafted legal guillotine. The clause stated in absolute, undeniable terms that the foundational data encryption core of the company was officially patented directly under my legal name. The founders had granted the corporation an exclusive, perpetual, and completely free license to utilize my patented architecture to run their entire medical database. However, this free license was strictly conditional. It remained completely valid only as long as I was actively employed by the corporation, and crucially, only if my exclusive vested pension benefits remained entirely unaltered and fully intact. My eyes scanned the next paragraph, absorbing the penalty conditions. If the corporation ever unilaterally terminated my employment without cause or broke the fundamental structure of my vested benefits, the free license would instantly evaporate. The agreement would automatically default to a commercial, federal-level licensing rate, because the database handled highly sensitive, protected medical records for over 50 hospital networks. The mandatory relicensing fee was locked at exactly $40 million, plus retroactive operational fines for every single day they continued to use the code illegally. They thought they were saving a few $1,000,000 by robbing my retirement fund. Instead, they had unknowingly triggered a financial apocalypse. I did not celebrate. I needed absolute, undeniable verification. At exactly 8 o'clock that morning, I dialed the direct office line of an incredibly ruthless, high-priced intellectual property attorney based in Chicago, deliberately choosing someone 3 states away to avoid any local corporate conflicts of interest. I spent a grueling 2 hours walking him through every single line of the original contract, the recent automated human resources email, and the precise legal timeline of their actions. I paid his exorbitant $500 consultation fee up front just to hear his unfiltered, professional assessment. When he finally finished reviewing the digital scans I had sent him, there was a long, heavy silence on the line. Then, he let out a low, incredibly amused chuckle. "Chloe, I have been fighting corporate patent wars for over 25 years, the lawyer said, his voice dripping with pure disbelief. I have seen companies do some incredibly stupid things, but this is a masterpiece of executive incompetence. This clause is as tight as a bunker. There is absolutely no wiggle room, no arbitration loophole, and no statute of limitations that can save them. By officially signing the order to strip your pension, they just walked right into their own trap. They owe you the money, and the moment they try to process a single byte of data after your termination date, they will be committing massive federal intellectual property theft." The confirmation was the final piece of ammunition I needed. However, I knew exactly how corporations fought back. If I demanded the $40 million as an individual employee, Wyatt would immediately weaponize the corporate legal department to personally destroy me. They would tie me up in endless smear campaigns, accuse me of extortion, and drain my personal bank accounts through years of agonizing litigation. I could not be the disgruntled former engineer. I had to become something much larger, something completely untouchable. Before the sun even set that evening, I fired up a secure browser and navigated to the official corporate registry portal for the state of Wyoming, a jurisdiction famous for its absolute shielding of corporate ownership identities. I paid a specialized registration firm $2,000 to immediately establish an anonymous limited liability company. I named the entity Aegis Core Holdings. Through my Chicago attorney, I rapidly executed a binding legal transfer, quietly moving the absolute ownership of my foundational encryption patent away from my personal name and directly into the corporate vault of Aegis Core Holdings. The entire process took less than 48 hours. When Monday morning arrived, I was no longer just a betrayed worker marking time until her final day. I was the silent, invisible owner of the very ground Omnistrata stood upon, and I was about to pull the floor right out from under them. The greatest heists in modern history are never executed with ski masks, shattered glass, or loud explosives. They are pulled off in broad daylight, wearing business casual attire, through perfectly legal administrative updates and approved operational protocols. I did not need to write a single line of malicious malware. I did not hack a single terminal, nor did I steal any protected data. In fact, every single action I took during my final weeks at the corporation was completely compliant with standard operating procedures. I was simply doing my job with absolute, terrifying perfection. The first step of weaving my invisible spiderweb involved upgrading our core external communication gateways. Because Omnistrata handled millions of highly sensitive patient records, our data systems were required by federal law to maintain strict compliance with the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. Under the completely legitimate guise of enhancing our data security before my departure, I pushed a massive, officially approved update to the main application programming interfaces that connected our servers to the Department of Health. Buried deep within this routine security patch was a completely standard, incredibly simple automated license verification protocol. It was designed as a fail-safe mechanism to protect patient privacy. The logic was flawless and entirely legal. The system would silently check the ownership status of the foundational encryption patent every single time a data request was made. If the patent license was completely valid, data would flow normally. However, if the system detected that the patent license was invalid or had expired, the entire database would instantly snap into a permanent read-only mode. No new data could be written, no existing data could be exported. The system would essentially turn into a gigantic, useless digital museum piece in order to prevent unauthorized data manipulation. I even meticulously documented this new security feature on page 87 of the quarterly technical handover manual, fully knowing that absolutely no one in the executive suite would ever bother to read it. While my lethal digital traps were silently deploying across the server network, my physical performance in the office was worthy of an Academy Award. I completely embraced the role of the defeated, submissive, middle-aged corporate drone. I brought a few small cardboard boxes into my cubicle and slowly began packing away my framed photographs, my favorite coffee mugs, and my dying potted succulents. When the newly hired, incredibly cheap outsourced engineering team finally arrived for their mandatory training sessions, I greeted them with a warm, completely hollow smile. I sat with them for hours in the stuffy conference rooms, patiently handing over generic, low-level administrative passwords and basic operational manuals. I taught them how to restart the user interface panels and how to change the color schemes on the employee dashboards. I gave them the absolute illusion of total control while keeping the true master keys securely locked away behind my intellectual property barrier. They furiously took notes, completely unaware that I was teaching them how to drive a car that was about to have its entire engine legally repossessed. My manufactured obedience provided endless entertainment for the executive board. During my final Friday afternoon status meeting, I sat quietly at the end of the long mahogany table while Wyatt and Vanessa reviewed the transition timeline. Wyatt leaned back in his expensive leather chair, steepled his fingers, and looked at me with a sickeningly smug expression. I have to say, Chloe, It is incredibly refreshing to see a senior team member act with such profound maturity during a corporate transition, Wyatt stated, his tone dripping with patronizing arrogance. Many people would let their emotions get the better of them, but you have been an absolute team player. The handover is proceeding smoother than we ever projected. Vanessa, sitting directly to his right, offered a sharp, completely fake smile. We really appreciate your cooperative spirit. Chloe, it makes this difficult pivot so much easier for everyone involved. I am sure you will enjoy having some extra free time to finally relax and figure out your next steps. Maybe take a long vacation. I am definitely planning a major life change, I replied softly, keeping my eyes fixed firmly on my legal pad to hide the violent, triumphant fire burning in my pupils. I just want to ensure everything here operates exactly as it is legally required to. They practically beamed with pride, genuinely believing they had completely crushed my spirit. But my plan had one final, crucial missing piece. I knew exactly how cowardly corporate executives operated during a crisis. When the system inevitably crashed, Wyatt's first instinct would be to lie. He would try to cover up the catastrophic failure, issue fake technical apologies to the hospital networks, and buy enough time to force his cheap engineering team to build a workaround. I could not allow them to hide the body. I needed the authorities to walk right into the room the exact moment the murder happened. That weekend, using a highly encrypted proxy server from a busy public library downtown, I accessed the official whistleblower portal for the Federal Commission on Cybersecurity and Data Compliance. I submitted a highly detailed, entirely anonymous request for a routine, unannounced compliance audit of Omnistrata Data Corporation. I specifically cited concerns regarding the implementation of their brand new artificial intelligence software suite and its handling of federally protected medical records. The Commission routinely schedules these surprise audits based on anonymous insider tips. I carefully manipulated the submission timeline, ensuring the administrative gears would grind at the exact right speed. I selected the automated requested date for the physical inspection to fall exactly on the second day after my official termination from the company. I had built the perfect cage. I had securely locked the doors. I had handed them the keys to their own destruction, and then I personally invited the federal government to come and watch them hang. I was sitting on the sunlit patio of a small, upscale cafe in downtown Austin, listening to the gentle hum of morning traffic. The contrast between my current reality and my past life was profoundly poetic. Instead of shivering in the freezing 68 degrees of my former corporate cubicle, I was bathed in the warm, golden morning light. Instead of forcing down a cup of bitter, cold office coffee, I was slowly savoring a perfectly crafted, steaming hot matcha latte. It was exactly 9 o'clock on Tuesday morning. Precisely 48 hours had passed since I had surrendered my plastic security badge, packed my meager cardboard boxes, and walked out of the heavy glass doors of Omnistrata Data Corporation for the last time. I casually checked my gold wristwatch. Right about now, the automated administrative scripts in the Human Resources Department were programmed to execute their final, sweeping payroll and benefits updates for the month. Miles away, inside the sterile, heavily guarded corporate tower, Vanessa was likely sitting at her pristine mahogany desk, with a casual, utterly indifferent flick of her wrist. She clicked the final confirmation button on the payroll dashboard to officially and permanently dissolve my vested pension trust. The exact millisecond that digital command registered in the central financial database, my invisible spiderweb violently pulled taut. The health department application programming interfaces instantly detected the catastrophic breach of the intellectual property agreement. Without a single human command, the foundational encryption core rapidly revoked its own operational license. The steel trap snapped shut. Inside the massive, heavily air-conditioned server rooms, millions upon millions of highly sensitive patient files, critical surgical histories, and active pharmaceutical records simultaneously encrypted themselves behind an unbreakable digital concrete wall. The massive corporate database snapped violently into a permanent, completely locked read-only state. No new patient intakes could be registered. No critical medical histories could be exported to the emergency rooms. Within 60 seconds, the absolute, arrogant silence of the Omnistrata executive floor was shattered by a deafening, terrifying chorus of ringing telephones. Over 50 major hospital networks across the country were suddenly staring at frozen monitors. Completely unable to access the life-saving medical data they paid our company millions of dollars a year to securely manage, administrators were screaming over the phone, warning that surgeons were standing in operating rooms completely unable to verify patient blood types or allergy records. I could easily picture the sheer, unadulterated chaos unfolding in the executive suites. Wyatt was undoubtedly sprinting down the hallway, his $5,000 tailored suit flying wildly behind him, sweating profusely and screaming at the top of his lungs. He stormed into the engineering department, demanding immediate, miraculous answers from the discount, outsourced artificial intelligence team he had so proudly hired to replace me. The junior contractors were absolutely terrified, frantically pounding on their keyboards, trying desperately to force restart the mainframes, but they were entirely locked out. They had no master keys, no foundational understanding of the complex core architecture, and absolutely no way to bypass a federally compliant security lockdown. The brilliant, ridiculously expensive artificial intelligence software they had purchased was completely useless, helplessly throwing automated errors against a titanium vault it could not comprehend. No matter what administrative command they typed, every single glowing monitor in the engineering department flashed the exact same, uncompromising warning message in bright crimson letters. System access denied. Proprietary license expired. Critical breach of contract detected. Please contact provider Aegis Core Holdings. Wyatt stared at the glowing red screens, his face draining of all color. He had absolutely no idea who or what Aegis Core Holdings was. He only knew that his entire corporate empire was bleeding out on the operating table, and he possessed zero surgical tools to stop the hemorrhage. However, the universe has a beautifully wicked sense of timing. Just as the partner hospitals began officially threatening massive, multi-million-dollar class action lawsuits over the phone lines, the glass doors of the main corporate lobby slid open, 3 stern, unsmiling field agents from the Federal Commission on Cybersecurity and Data Compliance walked directly up to the front desk, flashing their heavy government badges. They loudly announced a surprise: zero-notice regulatory audit regarding the mishandling of protected medical records. The timing was flawlessly devastating. The federal agents marched into the engineering bay and demanded immediate access to the database, only to find the entire corporate system completely paralyzed due to an unlicensed, highly illegal use of proprietary software. Wall Street possesses an incredibly sensitive nose for corporate blood in the water. The news of a massive federal raid combined with a catastrophic, national-level medical data blackout leaked to the aggressive financial press in less than 30 minutes. By 10:30 in the morning, the stock ticker for Omnistrata Data Corporation was in absolute freefall. Blind panic selling consumed the market floor. The company valuation plummeted by 20%, then 30%, triggering automatic trading halts and wiping out hundreds of millions of dollars in shareholder equity in a single, brutal morning. The executives were trapped inside a burning building, and I had legally, systematically removed every single fire extinguisher. Sweating through his expensive silk shirt and facing total corporate annihilation, Wyatt ordered his elite legal team to completely drop everything and track down the mysterious Aegis Core Holdings. It took the frantic corporate lawyers nearly 2 hours to trace the registered corporate shell company to my ruthless intellectual property attorney in Chicago. They begged him for an immediate, emergency virtual meeting to negotiate a temporary data unlock. They frantically offered whatever exorbitant licensing fees were necessary to get the hospitals back online and get the federal agents out of their lobby. My lawyer, completely unfazed by their screaming desperation, delivered the exact ultimatum I had carefully scripted for him in advance. He calmly informed the Omnistrata legal team that Aegis Core Holdings was indeed willing to negotiate the immediate restoration of the system licenses to save the patients. However, the shadow organization strictly prohibited any form of online video conferences, phone calls, or digital mediations. If Omnistrata wanted their medical database unlocked and their company saved from federal indictment, the entire executive board, including the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, and the director of human resources, had to clear their schedules immediately. They were ordered to prepare the most secure, physical conference room at their headquarters. The supreme representative of Aegis Core Holdings would arrive in person at exactly 2 o'clock that afternoon to deliver the final, absolute, and non-negotiable terms of their total surrender. The heavy oak doors of the executive boardroom were securely locked from the inside. The room was a massive, glass-enclosed sanctuary of immense corporate wealth, featuring a polished mahogany table and panoramic views of the Austin skyline. However, at 10 minutes before 2 o'clock that afternoon, it felt exactly like a high-altitude death chamber. The chief executive officer was pacing frantically near the floor-to-ceiling windows, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. Wyatt was slumped in his chair, aggressively biting his fingernails, while Vanessa sat rigidly beside him, staring blankly at the emergency legal documents scattered across the table. They were completely cornered by federal regulators in their lobby, facing catastrophic lawsuits from 50 hospitals and watching their stock price burn to absolute ash. They were holding their breath, waiting for the mysterious representative of Aegis Core Holdings to arrive and bleed them dry. At precisely 2 o'clock, the heavy doors clicked unlocked and swung open. I stepped into the room wearing a sharply tailored, jet black suit, the kind of armor you wear when you are about to dismantle an empire. I carried absolutely nothing except a single, thin manila folder resting calmly in my left hand. The immediate reaction was absolute, breathtaking silence. Wyatt's jaw physically dropped, his eyes bulging as if he had just witnessed a ghost materialize from the floorboards. Vanessa gasped, her hands trembling so violently she knocked over her crystal water glass, sending a cold puddle spilling across the expensive mahogany wood. The chief executive officer stopped his frantic pacing and stared at me in total confusion, having rarely bothered to interact with his engineering staff. I did not wait for an invitation. I walked directly to the head of the table, pulling out the grand leather-backed chairman's seat, and sat down with absolute authority. "Chloe," Wyatt finally stammered, his voice cracking under the crushing weight of sudden realization. "What in the absolute hell are you doing in here? Where is the representative from Aegis Core?" I smiled, a cold, empty expression that did not reach my eyes. I tossed the manila folder onto the center of the table. It slid perfectly across the polished wood, stopping right in front of the chief executive officer. "I am the sole proprietor and executive director of Aegis Core Holdings," I stated, my voice echoing clearly in the dead silence of the room. "And you are currently trespassing on my proprietary property." The chief executive officer hurriedly flipped open the folder. Resting on top was a certified original copy of the foundational intellectual property contract I had signed 14 years ago, with Appendix 9.4C highlighted in bright yellow ink. Right beneath it was a perfectly formatted, legally binding invoice printed in bold black lettering. The total amount due was exactly $40 million. "This is criminal extortion," Wyatt suddenly screamed, slamming his fists onto the table, his face turning a furious shade of crimson. "You hacked the mainframes. You planted a malicious virus before you left. I will have you thrown in a federal penitentiary for the rest of your miserable life." "I did not hack a single thing." "Wyatt," I replied, my tone completely flat and unbothered. "Every single line of code operating in that database right now is fully compliant with federal health regulations. The system did exactly what it was legally programmed to do. It verified the intellectual property license. You, however, decided to play God with my life. You signed the termination order for my vested pension trust. The exact second you executed that order, you unilaterally broke the conditions of the free license. You triggered the commercial relicensing clause. You armed the bomb, and Vanessa pressed the detonator. I am simply here to collect the standard federal commercial fee for the software you are currently stealing." The chief executive officer looked wildly between the contract, Wyatt, and Vanessa. The horrifying reality of their monumental incompetence was finally dawning on him. He collapsed into the chair next to me, dragging a heavy hand down his sweating face. "Chloe, please," the chief executive officer pleaded, dropping the arrogant corporate facade entirely. $40 million in pure cash will completely gut our operational reserves. We can offer you restricted stock options, a seat on the executive board, or a highly lucrative consultation retainer. We can make you whole. Your stock is currently plummeting in freefall. Your board is under federal investigation, and I would rather burn my own money than consult for this sinking ship, I replied, leaning forward and locking eyes with him. I do not accept corporate equity. I want $40 million wired directly to the Aegis Core Holdings Offshore Trust within exactly 24 hours. If the wire transfer is even 1 minute late, I will personally direct the federal agents waiting in your lobby to the exact server partitions where you have been running unlicensed code. I will let them arrest the entire executive board. I turned my gaze slowly toward Wyatt and Vanessa. Vanessa was openly weeping now, her mascara running down her cheeks in dark, pathetic streaks. However, there is one final, non-negotiable condition for the decryption keys, I continued, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Wyatt and Vanessa will draft their unconditional resignations right now, at this very table. They will forfeit all their executive bonuses, their severance packages, and their stock options. If they are not escorted out of this building by corporate security before I leave this room, the medical database remains permanently locked. You cannot do this to me, Vanessa sobbed, reaching a trembling hand out toward me. Chloe, we were best friends. I had to follow executive orders, please. You called me a worker bee drained of honey. Vanessa, I said, quoting her deeply buried email word for word. I am just doing a little logistical cleanup. Less than 24 hours later, the massive wire transfer cleared into my secure accounts. True to my word, I released the decryption keys, allowing the hospitals to access their critical data and narrowly saving the company from total federal dissolution. Wyatt and Vanessa were unceremoniously thrown out onto the street, their lucrative careers permanently destroyed by the sheer magnitude of their publicized incompetence. I did not buy a private island or a fleet of luxury sports cars with the money. Instead, I established a massive, heavily funded legal defense foundation. I hired the most aggressive intellectual property attorneys in the country. Our sole mission was to quietly hunt down corporations that tried to rob senior technical engineers of their patents, their pensions, and their dignity. I sat in my new, sunlit corner office, looking out over the city. My personal phone began to ring. It was a new encrypted message from a panicked system architect in Seattle, whose company was trying to steal his life's work. I smiled, feeling a deep, profound sense of purpose. I was no longer the victim. I had become the silent judge, jury, and executioner of Silicon Valley, and business was absolutely booming. Thank you so much for listening to this story today. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please drop your city or country in the comments below. As I mentioned earlier, YouTube has unfortunately demonetized our channel, meaning we have absolutely no budget to continue operating here and will not be uploading new videos to this platform in the near future. We are transitioning our entire operation to Patreon. If you found today's revenge story satisfying, please help us keep the channel alive by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon. Over there, you will get to listen to the absolute best, most detailed, and exclusive true stories featuring incredible voice acting that we simply cannot publish on YouTube. You can join right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you again for your incredible support. And I will see you over on Patreon for the next takedown.